rain hadn't stopped for hours. It poured relentlessly against the glass walls of Cafe Verona, a small corner restaurant glowing softly under the gray evening sky. Inside, the hum of conversation and the faint aroma of roasted coffee filled the air. At a corner table by the window sat Ethan Miller, staring at the single red rose resting beside an untouched cup of cappuccino. His phone screen glowed with a message that had shattered his quiet anticipation. "I'm sorry, Ethan. I can't make it tonight. No reason, no explanation, just silence after that." He had dressed carefully that evening. A clean navy shirt, his father's old wristwatch, and the faintest hope that maybe, just maybe, this blind date would bring something new into his lonely life. But now, as minutes turned to hours, all he could feel was the slow ache of disappointment. Around him, couples laughed, forks clinked against plates, and the world moved on, unaware that someone's faith in love had just cracked a little more. If you believe in kindness, in second chances, and in miracles that arrive when we least expect them, take a second to like, comment, share, and subscribe to our channel, because this story will remind you that sometimes life writes its most beautiful chapters through heartbreak. Ethan's life hadn't been easy. At 33, he worked as an auto mechanic in a small workshop downtown. His hands were rough, his days long, and his nights mostly silent. 2 years ago, he'd lost his mother, the only person who never gave up on him. Since then, every celebration, every holiday, had been hollow. He'd finally agreed to this blind date after a friend insisted he needed to start living again. But now, staring at that empty chair, he wondered if maybe love just wasn't for people like him. He sighed and signaled for the check. The waitress approached, a young woman with tired eyes but a kind smile. Her name tag read Lila. She looked about 26, her dark hair tied back neatly, and there was something gentle in the way she spoke, as if she'd learned to carry other people's sadness carefully. "Rough night?" she asked softly, noticing the single rose. Ethan smiled weakly and nodded. "She canceled." Lila hesitated for a moment, as if choosing between professionalism and empathy. Then she said quietly, "Sometimes people leave because they're not meant to stay. But maybe it just clears space for someone who will." Ethan looked up, surprised at her words. There was something comforting in the way she said them. Not as pity, but as understanding. He paid the bill, thanked her, and walked out into the rain. But when he unfolded the receipt in his hand, something strange caught his eye. There was handwriting on the back. Not printed, but written carefully in blue ink. It said, "You looked like you needed a friend tonight. If you ever feel like talking, I'll be here until closing." Love for a moment, Ethan just stood under the awning, the rain misting against his jacket. The world suddenly felt less cold. He folded the note and slipped it into his wallet. Something inside him stirred, a small flicker of warmth where emptiness had been. He didn't go back that night, but he couldn't stop thinking about the girl who had noticed what nobody else did, that he was breaking quietly behind a polite smile. Days passed. Work went on as usual, filled with the smell of grease and the sound of engines. But every evening, Ethan found himself walking past Cafe Verona, glancing inside, hoping to catch a glimpse of her. One evening, he finally gathered the courage to step in again. It was quieter than before, just a few customers scattered around, and there she was, Lila wiping down a table near the counter. When she saw him, a flicker of recognition lit her face, followed by a smile that felt like sunlight through clouds. "You came back," she said softly. "Yeah," Ethan replied. "I thought maybe I'd take you up on that offer to talk." They sat together at his old table. What began as small talk about coffee and weather slowly unfolded into something deeper. She told him she worked double shifts to pay for her younger brother's college. Their parents had died in a car crash when she was 19, and she'd been raising her brother ever since. Life hadn't been fair to her either, yet there was no bitterness in her tone, only quiet resilience. Ethan listened, moved by her strength. For the first time in a long time, he wasn't thinking about what he'd lost. He was thinking about someone who was still standing despite her pain. That night, when he left the cafe, he realized he was smiling for real. Not out of habit, but from a place deep within. Over the next few weeks, Ethan returned often. Sometimes they shared stories. Sometimes they just sat in silence, finding comfort in each other's company. The world outside remained as harsh as ever, but inside that cafe, it was as if time slowed down and two lonely souls were learning to breathe again. One evening, as winter began to whisper through the city, Ethan noticed that Lila looked unusually pale. She kept rubbing her hands as if trying to shake off a chill. He asked if she was okay, but she brushed it off with a smile. "Just tired," she said. But that night, when he returned the next day, she wasn't there. Another waitress told him she'd been hospitalized. Something in him tightened. Fear, worry, and a strange helplessness. He went to the hospital and found her sitting by the window of a small ward, hooked to an IV, but smiling faintly when she saw him. "You didn't have to come," she said weakly. He sat beside her and held her hand gently. "You gave me a note when I needed someone," he said. "Now I'm just returning the favor." Tears welled in her eyes. She told him she had been hiding a heart condition, one that required expensive treatment she couldn't afford. She'd been saving every tip, working endless hours just to buy her brother another semester of education. "He doesn't know," she whispered. "He thinks I'm fine." Ethan felt something break inside him. That someone so kind, so selfless, was suffering in silence felt unbearably unfair. He stayed with her until the nurses asked him to leave. That night he went home and couldn't sleep. The next morning he walked into his workshop and made a decision that would change both their lives. He sold his motorcycle, the only thing he owned that held sentimental value, and used the money to help pay for her treatment. When she found out, she cried, insisting she couldn't accept it. But Ethan simply said, "You gave me back hope when I thought I'd lost it. Let me give you back your heartbeat." Weeks later, Lila's health began to improve. She returned to work slowly, her laughter brighter, her steps lighter. The cafe became their quiet meeting place, not for blind dates, but for something real, something built on shared pain, quiet compassion, and a note that had turned strangers into lifelines. Then one snowy evening, almost 6 months after that canceled date, Ethan walked into Cafe Verona with a rose, just like the first night. Lila was behind the counter, her eyes lighting up when she saw him. "Another date canceled," she teased gently. He shook his head, smiling. "No, this time I'm hoping someone says yes." He placed the rose on the counter and handed her a small folded note. She opened it, her hands trembling slightly. Inside were the words, written in Ethan's neat handwriting. "You gave me a reason to stay when I thought I had none. Will you have dinner with me? Not as my waitress, but as my heart's reason to smile?" Lila covered her mouth, tears glistening in her eyes. The cafe around them blurred as she nodded, unable to speak. The customers clapped softly, and for the first time Ethan realized that sometimes the love we wait for isn't the one we plan. It's the one that finds us when we're broken, sitting alone, holding a rose meant for someone else. From that night on, they were inseparable. Lila eventually finished paying off her brother's tuition, and Ethan opened his own small auto shop with a sign that read Verona Motors, where hope is repaired. Lila helped decorate it, adding tiny potted plants and a corner coffee table. "A little cafe spirit," she called it. Every anniversary, Ethan would bring out the old note she'd written on that first night, now framed above their bed. The words, though simple, carried a world of meaning. "You looked like you needed a friend tonight." Those words had changed two lives forever. So if this story touched your heart, if you still believe that kindness has power, that love can be born from the smallest act of compassion, then please take a moment to like, share, subscribe, and leave a comment. Because stories like this one remind us that every broken moment might just be the beginning of something beautiful. Special request: comment below. I believe in kindness. If you think the world needs more people like Lila, and remember this: sometimes the person who was meant for you doesn't arrive with fireworks or grand gestures. Sometimes they simply hand you a note, and it changes everything.